Hi everyone, how are you? So I am continuing with this painting of a queen being crowned by another one, and I was thinking, I came across this video, which is excellent, highly recommend, talking about how to create depth in a painting, and she reminded me of what I had learned in a watercolor workshop that I took. You know, you can take like 1-2 day workshops, which are great to learn more. So much to know with painting. These are my notes from it, you can see. But don't mind my handwriting here, but about creating depth. And what I want to do is I want to bring her out to seem closer and pushing her back. This is the new winner and the old ones. This is like the receding into the background, into history, and this one's coming out. So the way to do that, the way to create, is this column. This is the value, intensity, edges, temperature, texture, opacity. So you want to bring things forward in a painting. You want it lighter, more intense color, sharper edges, warmer color, more details in the texture, and more opaque. The things you want pushed or receded to the background, you want a little bit darker, muted, soft edges, cooler colors, smoother, not so textured, and more transparent. Depending how far away it is, to decide how cool and how transparent you want to go with that. So these two are not so distant; they're very close to each other. But I always want to keep in mind putting this more cooler and softer and more muted, and making her more bright and vivid. Look out, a little bit, it's subtle, but these are subtle things you learn with painting. So I'm gonna start with the faces and the arms, doing the skin color. And for that, I use a red color. I just use a watered down red for the first layer. So going through my choices here with the ArtVista, I want a warmer red tone for her face and a cooler one for the one on the left. And of course, you have a whole selection of colors. So I want warmer or more orangey red for the girl on the right. So I'll probably use like a vermilion color. And then for the girl on the left, I can either use a scarlet or a alizarin red. Yeah, so I'll probably use alizarin, vermilion. So it's a very slight temperature change there with these paints, but will help. So my palette is off to the side here. So that's why I close that bit. And I use my palette here to... Right, so I start off, use the same way. I just spray them all down with my water bottle. All the paints, get them ready. Particularly metallic colors. You want to have them sit for 30 seconds or so. I don't think I'm going to use metallic. I might with the dresses. But yeah, probably won't. I'm still debating that. I'm going to, right for now, just mix the reds. So let's see. I'll start with the vermilions. That is third one in here. Just mix up a nice watery mixture of that. And I need enough to cover her face, neck, arms. So yeah, it's a very orangey red. And just use a scrap paper to see if it's about the value that you want. Or I want, I should say. So that's going to be the girl on the left, and the one on the right, excuse me, that's the girl on the right. The one on the left will be a alizarin color. So I will put it here. And you can see, I don't know if you can tell on camera so much, but it is much cooler than vermilion. Only two different light reds here. The scratch paper here. Very light, and add a little bit more. Too dark, I think. A little more water. I want to make sure I have plenty of paint. Always mix more paint than you're gonna need. You don't want to run out, especially with skin. If you try to remix it again, go back and add some more vermilion. If you try to go back and mix it again, it's not going to be exactly the same. And it's not the end of the world. You can. Okay, so there's vermilion. And then the alizarin. Okay, so about the same. See, about you can tell they're two very different colors of red. Sure. We're very different temperatures, I should say, of the same color of red. So that side and get started. I also like to do, actually, before I do that, for the shading on the face, actually the first thing to do, I'm going to do is put some shading on there. And to do that, I'm going to, for the shaded areas, I'm going to use a blue color. And I think I will use peacock blue. That is about 5 in right here. One tricky thing with these 100 colors is it can be tricky finding the right color from the chart to making sure you don't mess up and pick the wrong notes there. So there's so many colors in one little area, so it can be a little bit of a. Gotta be careful picking the right color. Alright, so here we go. So this is going to be the shading color. That's a little too light. It's going to be a little darker. I want them to be about the same value for darkness. A little darker there. So add a little more water. Too dark, just add a little water. Okay, that'll work, I think. Just a little more water there. Yeah. That'll work. Okay, so I got my shading. And my skin tones. You can use any color for shading. You can do purples and greens, and usually use different. So now I'm doing voiceover because my sound didn't work. But here I'm just talking about the fact that I'm putting shading under the chin and around the arms of the people. I'm using a reference picture. It's always good to use a reference picture in any paintings like this to know where to put in the shading. And there's going to be in general more shading, I think, that I'm going to put for the girl on the left, because she is going to be pushed into the background and her hair is a bit darker. So she's gonna, well, it's darker in general. The girl on the left has dark brown hair, and the one on the right has blonde highlights with some dark undertones. So that helps as well to push the girl on the left more in the background with the cooler colors and shading. So yeah, so for the rest of this, I'm just using the reference picture and putting in blue wherever there's shading around the face and around the hair and arms. And I also mentioned that, you don't have to use just one color. I'm just using one color for shading here. I'm being a little lazy. But if you want to get really intricate with it, make it even more realistic or interesting, besides blue, you can use a blue color for shading or use purple or green, the complement to red, because I'm using red for the skin. So usually you look closely at the shadows. There'll be some shadows that are darker and more cooler, whereas other shadows will be warmer, and so you might use more of a purplish color, or even a darker red if it's really bright. So, whatever you go by, what you want to accomplish, and how you want your painting and the shading to look on whatever face you're using. And besides doing the face, again, I'm going to use the blue on any areas that are going to be darker, just as an undertone, so I'm using, to bring it all together, bring some harmony. So I put the blue in the hair as well, and the dress of the girl on the left who's going to be pushed more into the background, and her hands as well. Another thing I should mention too is the paper that I'm using is not 100% cotton. I think I don't know what the percentage is, but it's definitely not 100%. So because of that, this method of using multiple layers for the shading works better if it's 100% cotton. So just to keep that in mind as well, that I've noticed that because it's got the pulp in it, what happens is the color sits on top of the paper more, and with 100% cotton where it will get absorbed, and so it's easier to layer and add multiple layers. Glazing, it looks very, works very well. But what happens if it's not 100% cotton, like this paper, what can happen is when I put I wait for this to dry, I put this on and I wait for it to dry, and then I'm going to add the skin tone, the red, on top of these blue shadows, and what can happen, because the paint's sitting on top, it can push it off and not, layer on top, glaze on top like you might want it to. So the paint moves around, and sometimes I lose that shadow and I have to go back later and try to add it again. So that can happen when you're using cheaper paper, because it is all about the paper. At the end of the day, you always hear that again and again. It's all about the paper. You want the best paper that you can get. And this is very good Strathmore paper, but it's not 100% cotton. It's the journal books that are usually, not as... There are journal books that are 100% cotton, but they're, more expensive. So, and just for practicing, but just to keep that in mind, that this technique works much better on 100% cotton paper. So if you can use a good paper, this works very well, much better than it does on the cheaper paper. It's all about the paper. Just keeping that in mind, when you're using a cheaper paper that's not 100% cotton, when you do use this method, you want to make sure, try to be very gentle, light brush when you're going over the shadowed areas where the color is, so that you don't move it, or try not to move it. So very gently putting the red, and I'm putting in, lifting some highlights right now, but when I paint over the blue shadowed areas, I try to be as soft and gentle with the brush as possible, so as not to move the paint too much.